Everyone suddenly burst out singing, writes the poet Siegfried Sassoon. And I was filled with such delight as prisoned birds must find in freedom, winging wildly across white orchards and dark green fields, on and on out of sight. Everyone's voice was suddenly lifted, and beauty came like the setting sun. My heart was shaken with tears, and horror drifted away. Oh, but everyone was a bird, and the song was wordless, and the singing will never be done. Under the Minnesota Capitol Rotunda a few years back, watching the little voting designation lights on the side of the voting indication board and the cameras of the deliberations on the screens from within the Senate chambers, we were there in the center, amid signs saying love is love, and other signs saying marriage equals one man plus one woman. And so the activists and the clergy, at least a portion of the clergy, began conspiring. Let's start singing, one said. Okay, we all said. And in the midst of the echo and the noise in the rotunda that was filled with dreams and hopes and chants and opposing signs and tension, we needed to create space for breath and for rhythm and for harmony. It sounded a little bit like this, if you can help me. It started quietly. It was a small circle of maybe 7 ministers to begin. And first it started with rhythm. It was a small circle. And as the rhythm began, there was a few more folks that started gathering around, some familiar with the song, others not. Some who were glad to keep a strong, simple beat, others who wanted a little more interesting beats. And then we started singing. Oh, I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. And the crowd grew. Oh, I woke up this morning with my mind, and harmonies came in. Stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. And then they started pounding. I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Harmony and rhythm and people gathered, and the circle grew, and we sang song after song after song after song, hands blistered, voices strained. We infused the space, and we gathered unlikely participants in. Even some of the opposing clergy couldn't help but sing some of these spirituals. We echoed the songs that have been sung down through the years, of people willing to free their soul, even when their physical lives were not free. We sang freedom songs and spiritual songs. We sang songs to remind those in power and to remind ourselves that there is something in social change and transformation that is like music. It's beyond the self. It transports us into community, helps us meet new people and strangers and make something of beauty together. Everyone was a bird, and the song was wordless, and the singing will never be done. We also sang Going to the Chapel and Gonna Get Married. We sang What the World Needs Now is Love, Sweet Love, and we sang This Little Light. History was in the politics. Beauty was in the singing. And then came an announcement, waiting for the vote. A silence took hold of the space. People embraced one another in hope and in fear, hands held in prayer and in anxiousness. And what began as a quiet vote and just small lights lit up on the voting board outside the Senate chambers came a small cheer and then a growing thunderous roar when marriage equality came to Minnesota. The rotunda filled with cheers and joy and hope, and people, after having sung together now for days in this interfaith communal congregation, that gathering in the rotunda began singing, Amen, Amen, Amen. Our world, so worn and weary, needs music pure and strong, wrote Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Music to soothe all sorrow. There is a long tradition spanning time and culture and century of the centrality of music and communal singing, carrying the essence, the spirit of a movement, of a generation, of the work for a more just and equitable world. That's why we hear songs constantly in the wider culture in our global world at some of the most poignant or hopeful moments. Each year on New Year's Eve, as the ball drops in Times Square in New York, you hear that somewhat haunting, yet still hopeful song of John Lennon singing Imagine. You hear the Korean folk song Arirang as North and South Korea march in together as one team in Pyeongchang for the Winter Olympics. These songs and these moments can in some ways seem like a sappy, sentimental thing happening with no depth. But they're not saying everything will be okay or all is well. At times they are a lived reality, but more often than not, these are songs of a desperate hope of who we want to be in the world, all mixed up with grief and hardship and struggle and politics and culture and violence and despair. And yet there is something in the singers and in the song that remind us of who we want to be and what we want to create together. The people of Estonia have long turned to song. Songs of identity and of struggle, of hope and of possibility. Song festivals there, these giant gatherings dating back to 1869, have captured the spirit and heart of that country. 20 to 30,000 singers would gather on the stage and sing together in this choir. They draw crowds of over 100,000. Communal singing has been at the core of the culture for centuries. For years, under the Soviet era, songs included propaganda, and yet, in the midst of deep censorship and Soviet control, Estonian composers and artists created music and sang songs in defiance. They had to be creative. Composers wrote music that seemingly expressed a general love of country, while more deeply referring to the country before Soviet control, lifting up self-determination and a government that was now failing the people. The song Muasama on Minu Arm, or Land of My Fathers, Land That I Love, was written from an old poem, and it sneakily slipped by Soviet censors in the late 1940s, and the people sang it, but then it was found out, and the song wasn't allowed to be sung at all in the country in the 1950s. By the 60s, it regained a quiet place in the singing festivals, and in 1969, at the 100th anniversary of these song festivals, the choirs on stage and the audience all began to sing it in unison as a mass, hundreds of thousand people choir, right in the face of Soviet orders, literally to leave the stage. Nobody left the stage. They kept singing. A military band was ordered to play to drown out the sound of the singers, but just a mere 100-instrument band cannot match the sound of hundreds of thousands of singers singing in unison. They sang for their lives. And that sparked something that in the 1980s would lead to something beautiful in Estonia. As part of a creative, artistic revolution, people began gathering under the guise that we're just gathering to sing. But behind the scenes, they were gathering to organize and to work for independence. Thousands gathered, and in June of 1988, over 100,000 Estonians gathered singing songs of protest for 5 nights straight. This became known as the Singing Revolution, a nonviolent artistic expression of dissent and protest as a revolutionary act of defiance. Core to their organizing was singing, and after years of music and song from generation to generation, as well as political resistance strategy, and while there was more than one strategy, of course, and more than one approach toward the work of independence there, as any social transformation always is messy and complicated, still amongst the tension there was music, and Estonia regained their independence nonviolently in 1991. Everyone suddenly burst out singing, writes the poet. As prison birds must find in freedom, everyone's voice was suddenly lifted. Beauty came like the setting sun. Horror drifted away. Oh, but everyone was a bird, and the song was wordless, and the singing will never be done. This month marks the 50th anniversary of the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King was well versed in the power of music, as is clear from the freedom songs that were infused in the civil rights movement. He spoke of the power of music beyond protest songs, though, as well. Speaking of the blues and of jazz, Reverend Dr. King wrote, "Many things come out of oppression. God has endowed we creatures with the capacity to create, and from that capacity has flowed sweet songs of sorrow and of joy that have allowed us to cope with this environment." He writes, "Jazz speaks for life, and the blues tell the story of life's difficulties, and if you think for a moment, you will realize that they take the hardest realities of life and put them into music only to come out with some sense of new hope." He says, modern jazz has continued in this tradition, singing the songs of a more complicated urban experience. When life itself offers no order or meaning, the musician creates an order and meaning from the sounds of the earth which flow through the instrument and voice. Much of the power of our freedom movement, he said, in the United States has come from music. It has strengthened us with its sweet rhythms when courage began to fail. It has calmed us with rich harmonies when spirits were down. For in the particular struggle here, there is something akin to the universal struggle of all people. Everybody has the blues. Everybody longs for meaning. Everybody needs to love and be loved. Everybody needs to clap hands and be happy. Reverend Dr. King drew from a strong tradition of slave songs and spirituals, all of which were a way of expressing the deepest meanings of what it meant to be human and what it meant to survive captivity. Maybe you know the words of the old spiritual song, "And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave." It was a protest song. It was defiance, that their soul could not be bound, that their soul would never be the slave of another, even if their physical reality was bound. It was a song of possibility, as well as of a hope for true and real freedom in this world, in this life. Somehow it began in the heart. At the 50th anniversary of the march in Selma, thousands of people gathered in the small, kind of crumbling town of Selma, Alabama, filling every street with groups of people, this multi-block bottleneck coming to the street to be able to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the site of Bloody Sunday. A chance to march across the bridge, remember the courage that it took then and the work that still remains. Right in the middle of the street, just a few blocks back from the Edmund Pettus Bridge, was a giant piece of canvas on the ground. The people, as they marched and they chanted and they sang, all these different people from across the country, across the globe, parted like the Red Sea around this canvas of art. On it were words and images of hope and freedom, struggle and joy, love and possibility. Children drew pictures of flowers and the sun, their loved ones. People drew tears and names of loved ones gone. And in the center were hand-drawn pictures of Reverend Dr. King and the Edmund Pettus Bridge, billy clubs, dogs, hoses, as well as hands and arms that were linked and joined together. You wouldn't think it quite fit there, that this was the best spot for an art installation. Right in the middle of the road, right in the middle and the midst of thousands upon thousands of marchers on their way leading toward a bridge of reverent memory, right there in the middle of it all was color and canvas and paint, and people cleared a path. They made a way. They parted their formation to make hallowed the sacred ground that was beneath their feet. It was like a scroll that was just laid across the broken and chipped pavement. There were brushes and pencils all over it and markers at the ready, awaiting anybody who passed by to add their story, add their color to the shared canvas and the shared memory of that place. Because when we think about it a little more deeply, when we take a moment to pause and remember, we recall that much art comes out of struggle. Some of the most inspiring poetry and writing, some of the most exquisite paintings and sculptures, some of the most powerful stories, songs, legends, music are right down in the center of the street in the middle of town when you fear they will be trampled, but we know that we make a way because art and music and creativity are hallowed ground beneath our feet, and they come out of struggle, personal, communal, global. The song Gathered Here comes out of San Francisco, written in the midst of the AIDS crisis as a song of solidarity and hope of community, in particular in an open and affirming church. It was written by Phil Porter, a minister and artist and activist in the United Church of Christ. It was a time of fear and loss, grief and uncertainty in the LGBTQ community. Friends would gather for comfort and for strength, knowing that strength comes in their gathering, in support and love for one another, right in the midst of challenge and despair. Even as their own or their friends' bodies were failing because of AIDS, they gathered as one strong body. And so think for a moment of being in that space. Think of the community that formed around grief and uncertainty, around beauty and hope. They sang it as a prayer. They sang it for strength. They sang it as quiet meditation. So we're going to sing it again. First, all together once, quietly. And we'll start quietly and then move a little louder in our last verse, and then quiet again. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit, draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, 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 gathered here in the mystery of the hour. There is a silence after the music that is not possible before the song is sung. Music creates the space for joy and for strength, for grief and for tears. It opens a way, it parts the space for a silence and an experience that was not possible before the music infused it. It takes creativity. It takes grit and determination and persistence and resilience to face fear, to face oppression, to face force and hatred with harmony and rhythm and with song, to meet injustice or totalitarianism with art, with beauty, with community, with a shared vision, a shared voice that is large enough, strong enough, beautiful enough to sing down the drums and instruments of war. Sometimes to hold the breadth of a story, to hold the depth of a struggle, to hold the realities of life, you need some song, some color, some canvas, some expression of life and vibrancy and resilience that has the strength of one strong body to hold the struggle and draw people together. You create those moments right in the middle of the street, right in the middle of your messy, complicated life, in your work, in your relationships, in your tasks. You sing and make a space within your own heart first for something beautiful to take root and to grow. That's where you find it, right in the middle of your path, right in the middle of everything, asking you to make space for whatever it is that is laid like a scroll on the chipped and broken pavement of this world. That's the space for beauty to start. Our closing hymn is number 170. I invite you to rise in body or spirit as we sing together.